Hey, what's up? It's Dusty and Dice, and today's quest is the Cypher System Rulebook Part 2. Alright, so we are doing the Cypher System Rulebook Part 2 today. If you haven't seen my first Cypher System Rulebook video, please go back and watch that. But I want to continue on talking about the Cypher System Rulebook. The first video I did, that you should go back and check out if you haven't seen it, covered all of this. Pretty much all of the player related stuff in the Cypher System Rulebook. So I covered all of this in the first video. So if you haven't seen that, go back and check that out. Today we're picking up with the stuff that's more GM oriented. Okay, so if you're a GM, this is the video that you're going to want to start paying attention to. I don't think we're going to get through all the GM stuff today. So there'll be subsequent videos after this one. Today, we're probably just going to look at the genres. I don't know if we're going to go longer than that. But, all right. So, welcome, my fellow adventurers. Today, we're going to explore the genre section. It says chapters 13 through 21, but I just treat it as one big section because it's all dealing with genres. And let me say this up front. Monte Cook Games did send me a complimentary copy of the Cypher System Rulebook so that I could show it to you guys. So thank you, Monte Cook Games. So we're going to be looking at the genre chapter. And will it be a treasure trove of discovery or just another forgotten relic? Let's find out. So what is it about? What is the genre section about? Well, the Cypher System Rulebook is a universal game system. You can use it to make pretty much any role-playing game you can think of. So the genre section is Monte Cook Games' way of giving you guidance for making the game that you want to make. So if the game you want to make is a fantasy game or a modern game or a sci-fi game or a horror game, they've looked at some of these more common genres, and they're giving you guidance and some mechanics and some equipment that relate to that genre to help you when you're writing your own game or you're writing your own setting in that genre. Okay, so that's what that section is about, and it fits well in the book because, I mean, this is a universal game system, and you're going to be making your own setting, so having guidance when it comes to making a fantasy setting or making a post-apocalyptic setting in this universal game system, that'll really help out. So let's take a look at the first one, all right? So the first one's fantasy. I'm going to take a look at it right now. All right, so here is the guidance on fantasy. Let me get it in the frame here a little bit. All right, so they give you some guide. So first off, I mean, they do have their white book, Godforsaken, if you want to just get that book and have a ready-to-go fantasy setting or whatever. But if you're the creative GM that wants to create your own setting and you have this awesome setting in mind, and you want to use the Cypher system, which is a really versatile, narrative-driven system, this gives you great guidance. And so they give you guidance on creating a fantasy setting and running a fantasy setting. But here you go, suggested types for a fantasy game. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road when you're using the Cypher system to create a fantasy game. So maybe in your game there's going to be knights or rangers or barbarians or thieves. Well, how does that translate into the Cypher system? Well, a knight is just the warrior type. Okay, a ranger, well, what type is that in Cypher system? Well, that's an explorer. What about a barbarian? What type is that in Cypher system? If I wanted to make a barbarian, I would be an explorer with the combat flavor. You dig what I'm saying? Or if I wanted to be a thief, you know, how could I make a thief in Cypher system? Well, I would be an explorer with the stealth flavor. You get what I'm saying? All right, so they give you guidance on making the types in the Cypher system into those usual let's say classes that you've seen common in a lot of fantasy role-playing games. And then you flip it over to here, suggested foci for a fantasy game. So this is a universal game, and like I showed in the last video, there is tons and tons and tons of foci because you can play all these different genres. You're not going to include all those foci in one game, right? So this narrows it down to the foci that work best in a fantasy game. Okay, suggested creatures and NPCs for a fantasy game. Later on, I'm going to show the creatures and the NPCs that they have in the book for you to fight. There is a bestiary in here. Haven't shown it yet, but here it shows these are the creatures and the NPCs that would go best in a fantasy game. And then they even give you some extras that are right here, just a quick one sentence. And creatures in the Cypher system are so easy because you're just pretty much just giving them a level, maybe a modification, and that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about that creature or NPC. And then you go over here and you have fantasy equipment. Like I said in the last video, when I looked at the equipment chapter was pretty thin because they saved talking about specific equipment until the genre chapters because you're doing genre specific equipment, right? So in the fantasy equipment, you're going to have arrows and crossbows and a burlap sack. Nice. Torches. You're going to have a dagger and hand axe and hides and a shield. Now, you want to have those things probably in a modern game, but in a fantasy game, all that stuff makes sense. You know what I mean? And like I showed in the last video, they break down the price of items not so much by a specific numerical value, but by these broad categories of inexpensive, moderately priced, expensive, very expensive, and exorbitant, right? So you can moderately priced item, you can get a shield, you can get a sword that's substandard, nice, like a goblin sword. It's all rusted, or you can get an expensive item like a light crossbow, or a sword that's of normal value, some chainmail. Kick it all the way up to the most expensive. You can get some elven chainmail. What's up? So that's like the regular items that you could buy probably in a shop. Now over here, there's fantasy artifacts. Now these are, kind of like the magical items and stuff that you might find in a dungeon or whatnot. And so they give you some examples. And these are just examples because you're expected to take the idea, the template of these, and go on and make your own, because it's a universal game system. You're making your own setting. You're going to make your own cool fantasy artifacts. You dig what I'm saying? But yet they give you some just to kind of show you what you can do. So Angelic Ward and Ring of Dragon's Flight and Soul Flaying Weapon and Spellbook of the Amber Mage and Wand of Firebolts. And if you look at the artifacts, so there's a level, just like a Cypher has a level. Form, kind of gives you a description or whatnot, what it does, the effect, and then a depletion. So every time you use that artifact, you're going to roll the depletion dice. For this one, it's a D20, and for other ones, it might be like a D10 or whatever. And it says 1 in D20. So if you rolled the 1 on that D20, that wand of firebolts has been depleted. You can't use it anymore. It has no more charges if you want to use, kind of like 5e terminology. But anyway, and then they give you some advice. The Monte Cook Games, they create some really interesting stuff because they do a lot of mixing up of genres. I mean, think about Numenera. That's science fiction and fantasy just kind of like put in a blender together. And so they even, in their genre chapters, they even give you a recommendation of mixing some genres together. Here you see fantasy and science fiction. Flip over to here. Now, we had talked about descriptors in the last video, and descriptors were like tough or I don't know. Now I can't think of any. Darn it. Uh, uh, oh my goodness. Why don't we just flip back? Flip back to the descriptors, and then I don't have to try to come up with one on the spot because I can't think of it. Like vicious or weird or stealthy or strong. Okay. The genre chapter is giving you the advice that you can use racial or no species, I guess it's now called species, as a descriptor. So dwarf, elf, they give you these as examples, and then you can take those and make whatever, whatever you want. Half giant, hellborn. I guess hellborn would be like a tiefling, I guess. I don't play with demons, devils, or gods in my game. That's my thing. So I wouldn't use hellborn, but this is a universal game system, so I get to choose what I want to include and what I don't want to include. You dig what I'm saying? And so maybe I include dwarf and I include elf, and I look at how they made the species descriptors, and I make like a halfling descriptor, and so on and so forth. You can make the races that you need, or species, sorry. So used to the old school way of um, of how things used to be described, but you can make these species descriptors for the game that in the setting that you're making, right? So they go on and they even give you optional rules for a genre. And the optional rule for fantasy is spellcasting. And what that does is it opens up spellcasting to more than just a spellcasting character. It might be the average person even knows a spell or two. You know what I mean? And how you can go about learning your first spell and more spells, and then even adding, and then how would you apply that rule to, a spellcasting person that already knows their stuff. So that's the fantasy genre in the Cypher System rulebook, and we're going to continue on. Look at maybe one or two more. There is, I don't think I actually gave the full list of genres that's covered in the book. My bad. It covers fantasy, modern, science fiction, horror, romance, superheroes, post-apocalyptic, fairy tale, and historical. So moving on, there's modern. I don't know if y'all have played a modern role-playing game. A lot of people just have, a lot of experience in D&D, and that's your typical fantasy. You dig what I'm saying? But modern role-playing game is pretty fun too. I know some people like to get out of the modern world and get away, but I dig role-playing games in pretty much any genre. Other than romance, I don't think I'd play a game in romance, but that's just me. Anyway, so modern. Now, they give you guidance on creating a modern setting, running a modern setting, molding characters for a modern setting, because that's going to be different than characters for a fantasy setting. But just like they did for fantasy, here they give you how do you take a modern, police officer or a modern detective and fit that into the types given in the Cypher System rulebook. And so just like they did with the fantasy, when it comes to like barbarian or thief, how do you make that in Cypher System? They give you guidance here on how to make a detective in Cypher System. You use the explorer with the stealth flavor, or if you want to be a lawyer or politician. Yeah. I don't know who would want to play that, but anyway, and then it moves on to suggested foci for a modern game. Like I said, there's so many foci in this game because it's a universal game system. They're trying to cover all these different genres. So they do a lot of the heavy work for you, and they cut it down to these would be the foci that would be good for a modern game. And they do the same thing for suggested creatures and NPCs for a modern game, because unless you're mixing genres, the monsters or the creatures and NPCs that you would have in a fantasy game, you wouldn't have in a modern game. You dig what I'm saying? So, and then they, just like in the fantasy genre, they give you these other smaller kind of readouts on creatures and NPCs. Then they hit the equipment, just like they did with fantasy. You have the inexpensive, moderately priced, expensive, very expensive, and exorbitant. But this time, obviously, it's modern items like a Kevlar vest or a shotgun or a bag of heavy tools. Okay, but there is a shield. Hey, there is a shield. Uh, that one was also in fantasy. You can get a nightstick. Yeah, go around with a nightstick in your modern game. Modern artifacts, and here they tell you they're like a modern game usually does not have artifacts. Now, if you're mixing genres, that would be different. But yeah, a modern game usually doesn't have artifacts. Um, and right here they say you could mix it up and do modern and fantasy, and then they kind of take like a left turn here, and they're like, oh, you could do childhood adventures. Some modern games are childhood adventures, and you're like, where where do you see that? Like Stranger Things, that's kids, right? So it gives you advice on running a childhood adventure in modern times. It gives you optional rules on how to adjust characters that are children, because they're not going to be as strong as like grown people and stuff. And then it gives you a D20 list on childhood adventure threats. So here's your adventure seeds. You know what I mean? And so that's cool. They give you a table to kind of inspire your adventures. You go into so then they turn away from like, okay, so there's the childhood stuff if you want to run a modern childhood game, or you can go a modern day crime and espionage tradecraft, which they mean kind of like like spy stuff. So they give you a D20 table on like spy adventures if you want to do spy adventures, right? So that's cool. And then they move on to science fiction. I love science fiction. I love a lot of genres, and I could see me like mixing them. I would mix like modern and sci-fi, and I would have like a modern day world, but then have like maybe sci-fi objects appear, and like just the power level of these highly advanced uh objects, and say somebody just like walking through the woods finds this thing, and they end up uh in this like incredible adventure just because they have this really weird and powerful artifact. That's kind of how I would do it. But anyway, straight science fiction, they give you once again guidance on creating a science fiction setting and how to run a science fiction setting. Then, just like they did with the other genres, if you're this is if you're making a pilot, like a starship pilot or whatever, how would you make that in the Cypher system? You'd be an explorer with a technology flavor. If you're a diplomat, how would you make that in the Cypher system? If you're a psionic person, how would you make that in the Cypher system? And it gives you what type you would use and a flavor if necessary. Just like the other genres, it gives you suggested foci for a sci-fi game, suggested creatures and NPCs for a sci-fi game, a few extras, and then it gets into the equipment, just like it did in the other genres. You have the inexpensive, moderately priced, so on and so forth. But in sci-fi, you got like a communicator and a stun stick. You're gonna have like more scientific type stuff that you're going to use. A stealth suit, jetpack. A jetpack? What? Man, I would rock that jetpack, son. Anyway, science fiction artifacts. So sci-fi could definitely have powerful items. And so you got a metabolism bud. Man, that boosts the creature's metabolism. Man, I could use one of those. A metabolism bud. Anyway, so yeah, it has artifacts just like the fantasy genre had, where it gives you how to determine the artifact's level, form, like what it looks like, the effect that it has, and depletion. This one doesn't have a depletion, so I'm guessing like let's This permanently raises the host speed pool maximum by 5 points. Okay, that's cool. These other ones you would use continually, and until well, each time you'd use them, you'd roll the depletion, and so this one you'd roll a d20, and if you roll a 1, your mind imager is depleted, and you have no more charges in it. Gives you some starship stats, because I mean you're probably gonna do space travel and stuff in sci-fi, right? If I was running a sci-fi game, I'm gonna be honest, man, I would do like Firefly or Serenity or something like that. I really dig that kind of stuff. Hard science fiction, if that's the route that you want to go. I'm not a huge fan of hard science fiction, but it's in here if that's the thing you dig. Effects of gravity on you, interplanetary travel, like the time it would take if you're doing a hard sci-fi game. Effects of vacuum. Traveling the solar system and orbital mechanics. Hey, if that's how deep you want to take it, man. And then they give you a D10 list of kind of like adventure seeds for a hard sci-fi game. These threats that you can throw in there. Once again, hard sci-fi is not really my game, but maybe that's what you dig. And then mixing it up, sci-fi and modern, kind of like what I said. Species descriptors, kind of like how fantasy could do elves and dwarfs. Well, they give you like artificial intelligence and Quintar, which I think is like a alien, and you can use those as descriptors, as like a species descriptor. And then they move on to horror, creating a horror setting. They have their horror book, which is called Stay Alive, if you want to get that white book, which digs deeper into the horror genre, and it has a built-in setting in it. I'm not crazy about the setting, but that's just me. But using this chapter in the book, I could make my own horror setting. You could make your own horror setting. So they give you guidance in creating a horror setting, running a horror setting, getting consent, because in a horror game, you're probably going to have some weird stuff or disturbing stuff come up. So you're going to want to know where people are cool and where people are uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Suggested creatures and NPCs for a horror game. Killer clown right there. You know what I mean? Other creatures and NPCs. Horror artifacts. That's the kind of like scary stuff that you shouldn't touch. And then when you do, it, stuff goes bad. Optional rule, shock. That when you see that horrible thing, do you run? Do you hide? Do you fight? Like that shock to your system. That's an optional rule. You don't have to include it. And then it kind of gives you shock levels if you want to use shock. Optional rule, horror mode. Now this is pretty cool, and I want y'all to take note of this. The optional rule, horror mode, what it is you let at some point in the game, you let the players know we're entering horror mode. And when you enter horror mode, like normally in the Cypher system, you would do a GM intrusion when somebody rolls a 1. But when you enter horror mode, it starts to be more often than that. It might be 1, and then it changes to 1 and 2, and then it changes to 1, 2, and 3, and it starts going up. And so there's going to be more and more GM intrusions, and what that does is like it ratchets up the tension, right? And here it shows you the escalation rate that you can do. Now, not only is that great in horror games, but think about it. Think about like an Indiana Jones movie. Like everything that dude tries to do, like something crazy bad happens and then he solves it. Like, he's trying to jump on a train and then he slips and then he grabs the bar at the last moment. And then, it's this constant of he's doing something and then something bad happens and then he solves that and then so on and so forth. So you could even use that horror mode outside of horror in another genre to just ratchet up tension. You dig what I'm saying? But they're giving it here in horror mode and it's an optional rule. You don't have to use it. GM intrusions in horror mode. You can also use an optional rule for madness. I mean, you know, the kind of Lovecraft type stuff, where, you just see something so horrible that, you start to go a little insane. And then they give you some guidance if you want to mix up horror and science fiction, or, like I said, Monte Cook Games loves to kind of mash things together. So romance, I'm not going to go much into this one because I don't play romance games, and I mean, if that's your thing, feel free to get the book and check it out. It doesn't have much in here for romance. I mean, it does have a couple tables. If that's your thing, all right. But I'm not about it. But it's in here if that's your thing. Superheroes. Who doesn't love some superhero action, man? Who doesn't want to have some superhero powers, dude? And there's an optional rule in here that I love. So anyway, creating a superhero setting, they give you some guidance on that. Running a superhero game, they give you some guidance on that. Once again, you kind of figure out what kind of hero you want as a broad category, and then they give you guidance on like what type and flavor you would take to become that type of superhero. Suggested foci for a superhero game. I mean, you're going to have like the coolest foci in a superhero game because like you're going to have like the super powerful ones, you know what I mean, in a superhero game. Suggested creatures and NPCs for a superhero game. So they even include in the bestiary, they include like some supervillains and stuff that you can use in your game. And then some of the shorter creatures and NPCs that they just kind of throw in there. Genetically enhanced bruiser, a ninja. Tailoring the Cypher system for heroes. So it's, it's saying, be a little loose with what people are able to choose, and let them kind of craft the character they want and customize some things, modify some things. Superhero equipment. But this is what I wanted to talk about. The optional rule power shifts. Okay, this is what's going to make you feel super. All right. And you get, I believe it's 4 power shifts. And you can put it into accuracy, dexterity, healing, intelligence, power, resilience, single attack, or strength. And so you get to disperse your power shifts however you want in those areas, right? So say you put 4 power shifts into strength, okay? Every power shift gives you a free level of effort when you're doing that specific thing, okay? So say I'm going to lift a heavy boulder, okay? And it's normally like a level 6 difficulty, okay? If I have 4 power shifts in strength, that gives me 4 levels of effort right off the bat. So that takes that level 6 difficulty and brings it down to a level 2 difficulty. And so I feel like I'm super and that I have super strength because lifting a boulder is super easy for me, where it'd be difficult for even my fellow superhero whose power shifts are in something else. Maybe, he has 4 power shifts in healing, so like he can't lift a boulder, but man, when he gets hurt, he bounces back like nobody's business. You dig what I'm saying? So yeah, you can really craft the superhero that you want to craft, and this helps you feel super. You dig what I'm saying? And then it says, you can give NPCs power shifts as well. And then you can even make things so in Cypher system the difficulty is 1 through 10. But when you're doing power shifts and you're dealing with superheroes, you might want to up that difficulty even further. So it talks about lifting the maximum difficulty from 10 to 15. Because I mean, you're 1 through 10. That's dealing with like regular folks, but now you're dealing with people that can toss a bus. So yeah. That shows you how you can modify the difficulty table. Some super heroic artifacts, maybe the bad guy is a super genius and he created a portal or whatever. Okay. So that's cool. And once again, they give you this mashup. If you want to do a mashup, superheroes and science fiction, that's cool. And then post-apocalyptic. Now, I haven't played a post-apocalyptic game, I don't think, but I'm getting more and more interested in the genre. Like when my buddy he brought up like playing Fallout, and when he first brought it up to me, I was like, I don't know if I could get into it. But more and more, I think about the post-apocalyptic setting, and I'm like, yo, you know what? That would actually be pretty cool. So I write over the post-apocalyptic genre stuff, and it looks pretty cool. So they give you some guidance on creating a post-apocalyptic setting, of course, and running a post-apocalyptic setting, wasteland threats, and customizing your aftermath. That's scavenging, because survival is a big thing in post-apocalyptic games. And then gives you like a D10 table on wasteland threats. So kind of gives you a little plot seed or something. A mutant bear. This house-sized radioactive bear whose roar can be heard for miles is something to avoid. Dang. You want to tussle with a house-sized bear? I'd rather not. So so that's cool that they give you a D10 table on that. Oh, and then they go into like you can find some useful stuff while scavenging. You can find some junk while scavenging. And then here it is, suggested types for a post-apocalyptic setting. So if you're going to play a survivor or a trader, or a sage, this is how you would make it in the Cypher system. It gives you the type and the flavor. Suggested foci for a post-apocalyptic game. And there's another thing about post-apocalyptic games that I'm really starting to dig is like they kind of instead of like magic or fantasy magic and spells and stuff, like they often have like psionics, and I kind of dig that, man. So I'm opening up more and more to post-apocalyptic games, and I think I'm going to try one pretty soon here. Suggested creatures and NPCs for a post-apocalyptic game, because you're going to have like some mutants, and you're going to have some soldiers, and maybe you have a zombie. You know what I mean? That's cool. Because I mean, who knows what the apocalypse was? Was it a zombie apocalypse? Was it a nuclear apocalypse? What was it? You know what I mean? So depending upon that, you're going to have different enemies, other creatures and NPCs, and then post-apocalyptic equipment. This stuff is once again broken down into the prices, and hey, radiation detector, so of course, this equipment is fit to the post-apocalyptic setting. So you got a radiation detector, night vision goggles, radiation tent, radiation pills. Hey, gonna need those if you're in the wasteland. Post-apocalyptic artifacts. Okay, military exoskeleton. I'm throwing one of those on. Let's do this. And then, dude, check this out. Okay, they have even some species that you can play that they give you as an example, but you can use them in your post-apocalyptic game. Species as descriptors: a Morlock and a Roach. You could be a Roach dude, man. They give you everything you need to play a Roach dude. You're a mutated Roach dude in a post-apocalyptic setting. I dig it. Like I don't know what setting I'd be crafting. It obviously would be like a nuclear Fallout type setting for Roach dudes to be there. But I still think that's cool. It's super creative. That's par for the course when it comes to Monte Cook Games. You dig what I'm saying? Fairy tale genre, I haven't really played much fairy tale stuff. I mean, the closest I've come is like running games for my kids of like No Thank You No Thank You Evil, that kind of thing. But they give you guidance on creating a fairy tale setting and running a fairy tale game, the nature of fairy. Oh, I mean, in D&D I have I have included Fae in our adventures, so I mean, that's probably the closest I've come to running fairy tale games. But they give you these awesome tables, and so in this one it's fairy tale wonders. So we'll just look at like number 14, a magic bookstore. A bookshop opens on the corner, offering amazing books whose titles are new to the characters and are not found anywhere else. Okay. And then they give you 20 fairy tale threats. So let's go with 16. Why not? A falling house. A house on legs stumbles, and the PCs must succeed on a difficulty 4 speed defense task or suffer 8 points of damage, and on a failed difficulty 6 might defense task, become buried under the rubble. Oh, snap. Okay. So that is a very fairy tale esque threat. I dig it. It gives you the creatures and NPCs for a fairy tale game. Suggested foci for a fairy tale game is going to be different. Because let's see, it says the base foci you make available to your players should be the base foci in the genre where your fairy tale is set. Okay, with perhaps a few more fantastic foci thrown in, if not already set in a fantasy genre. Okay, suggested creatures and NPCs for a fairy tale game. Fairy tale artifacts. Okay, artifacts in a fantasy setting and magic items in other games focused on fantasy world also be suitable for a fairy tale setting. However, every fairy tale artifact should come with a quirk that sets it apart from a simple wand of fire or a similar item. Come up with your own or roll on the quirk table below. Okay, so we'll say that wand of firebolts from the fantasy genre has 6. Bites owner with tiny teeth if jostled, dealing 1 point of damage. Okay, so you better be careful with your wand of firebolts. But I mean, I think I would be careful with that wand anyway. But I don't want to get bit uh, by my magic item. So I dig that, man. That once again, man, Monte Cook Games, they're always super creative, and that just adds just another cool narrative story thing to the game. Now, historical games, you want to play in World War II or ancient Rome or what have you. They give you guidance on creating a historical adventure. Historiness is the quality of seeming historical or evoking a historical feeling, even if it's not necessarily historical. I dig it. Gives you guidance on running a historical game. Historical artifacts. You can do if you're doing a historical game, you can set it in that specific time, or maybe you're a time traveler. You dig what I'm saying? So that would be cool. Suggested types for a historical game. Are you a knight, a pirate, a merchant, a noble? Is it set in medieval times? Is it set, in Roman times? When is it set? That's probably going to determine what you're going to be, and then from there you would choose a type and a flavor that would make your character whatever that occupation or whatever was back then. So here's suggested foci for a historical game. Suggested creatures and NPCs for a historical game. That list is going to be a little shorter because it has to be pretty general because they don't know where you're going to end up on the timeline here. And other creatures and NPCs in a historical game. Okay, and then so that is the genre section in the Cypher System Rulebook by Monte Cook Games, and by Monte Cook, Bruce R. Cordell, and Sean K. Reynolds, put out by Monte Cook Games. That's the genre section. I'm going to be doing the game mastering section next. Yeah, first. Doing the game mastering section next. But today we covered the genre section. Once again, it's technically all these chapters, but I just count it as pretty much just one section. And so they give you guidance on creating and running a game in these genres: fantasy, modern, science fiction, horror, romance, superheroes, post-apocalyptic, fairy tale, and historical. And they give you guidance, and they give you some optional rules and mechanical bits and some tables. Take all those tools and use them to help you craft the setting and the game that you want to play. That's what you're going to do with all with this toolbox that I just showed you. Okay, um, I I really like the advice that they give. I really like um, the mechanics and the optional rules that they give, especially the horror mode in the horror section. Um, you know, it's tough because it is a universal game system, and you can make any game. So you know they covered a like the widest amount of genres that they could in the space, you know, that you know they probably had. Um, you can't cover everything, and you know it's hard to cover like fantasy in the page in just a few several pages. That's why they have the white books that they put out. You know, so it is great guidance and a lot of useful stuff, but at the same time it is limited because the page count is smaller because they're trying to fit so many genres in it. But they're still good. It's still good, and you can still take it and run with it. You don't have to buy the white books uh, to run a fantasy genre or to run a sci-fi genre. You can take what's in here and run it. You dig what I'm saying? But if you want to go deeper, you can get the white books. Um, so I myself, like I said, I liked some of the optional rules, and I thought some of the tables were cool. I really like that horror mode. I keep bringing that up. I know. Um, if you have played the Cypher system, use the Cypher system rule book to create a setting, please leave in the comments below. Uh, you know, what setting did you make, and did you use some of the advice that's in the genre section, and did you use one of the optional rules? Yeah, leave that in the comment section, and I'll check that out. Um, Next, we're going to look at the Game Master section. I won't be doing that in this video, but that's what will be in the next video. Let's see, the Game Master section, which covers creatures, NPCs, ciphers, and running the Cypher system. So that's what we're going to be looking at next. If y'all like this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe. It'll really help the channel. Once again, thank you to Monte Cook Games for sending me the book so that I could share it with y'all. And until next time, y'all know the deal. Grab some friends and roll some dice, bruh. Dusty and Dice! Now, how do I end this thing?